In a modest Cleveland home, a 67-year-old seamstress was about to receive the call that would change everything. What started as a peaceful evening of quilting took a devastating turn when she learned her daughter had died in childbirth. Rose Gibson wasn't your typical grandmother. For decades, she had weathered life's storms with quiet strength and unwavering faith. When the hospital called about her newborn granddaughter and 5 other suddenly motherless children, she had no idea she was about to become their only hope. Rose's immediate decision to take them in would transform her golden years into the greatest challenge and purpose of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The needle caught the light from Rose Gibson's reading lamp as she pulled another careful stitch through the soft yellow fabric. At 67, her fingers weren't as steady as they'd once been, but 47 years of seamstress work had left them with a muscle memory that compensated for the slight tremor that came with age. The quilt spread across her lap was meant for her newest grandchild, Sarah's 7th baby, due any day now. "Lord knows that house is going to burst at the seams," Rose murmured to herself, though she smiled as she said it. Her daughter had always wanted a big family, just like the one Rose had raised in this very house on Maple Street. The neighborhood had changed over the decades. Some houses stood empty now, others showed the wear of families struggling to make ends meet. But Rose's small 2-bedroom home remained a constant. Neat flower boxes under the windows, a small garden in the back where she grew tomatoes and herbs, and the same cream-colored walls that had witnessed 3 children growing up, getting married, and starting families of their own. The television played softly in the background, some late-night talk show that Rose wasn't really watching. She preferred the quiet evening hours like this, when she could work on her projects and let her mind wander. Tomorrow she'd planned to visit Sarah, maybe bring some of the chicken soup that always helped when she was feeling heavy and uncomfortable in those final weeks. The baby would come soon, and then Rose would have 7 grandchildren to spoil and worry over. Sarah had called earlier that afternoon, her voice tight with discomfort. "Mama, I think this baby's gonna be stubborn like Marcus was. Still no sign of anything happening, and Dr. Peterson says I'm already 3 days past due." "Babies come when they're ready, honey," Rose had told her. The same thing she'd said when Sarah was born 28 years ago. "You just rest and let nature take its course." Now, stitching in the lamplight, Rose felt that familiar flutter of anticipation that came before a new life entered the world. She'd been present for the births of 5 of her 6 grandchildren, only missing Tyler's arrival because she'd been recovering from her own surgery. This time, she was determined to be there. David might not appreciate his mother-in-law hovering, but Sarah always found comfort in having her mama nearby during the difficult moments. The phone's shrill ring cut through the peaceful silence like a blade. Rose glanced at the clock on her mantel, 11:47 p.m. Late-night calls were never good news. Her first thought was of her own health. Maybe Dr. Williams calling about her recent blood work. Her second thought was more troubling. Sarah. Setting the quilt aside with care, Rose reached for the cordless phone on the side table. The caller ID showed Cleveland General Hospital. "Hello?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Gibson, this is Dr. Martinez from Cleveland General. I'm calling about your daughter, Sarah Gibson." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Rose gripped the arm of her chair, her seamstress fingers suddenly clumsy and cold. Has the baby?" "Mrs. Gibson, I need you to listen carefully. Sarah experienced severe complications during delivery. We did everything we could, but she suffered a massive hemorrhage that we couldn't control." The doctor's voice was gentle but direct, practiced in delivering news that would shatter worlds. "I'm very sorry to tell you that your daughter passed away at 10:23 this evening." The words hit Rose like physical blows. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the hardwood floor. She stared at the yellow fabric in her lap, bright and cheerful, and meant for a baby who would never know her mother's touch. "Mrs. Gibson? Mrs. Gibson, are you there?" Rose fumbled for the phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. "The baby? Is the baby?" "The baby is healthy. A little girl, 6 pounds, 8 ounces. She's in our NICU as a precaution, but she's strong." Dr. Martinez paused. "Mrs. Gibson, we need to discuss immediate care arrangements. The father. Mr. Gibson left the hospital shortly after we informed him. He said he couldn't. He wasn't able to stay. Rose closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle in her chest like stones. David had run. Of course he had. In 28 years of marriage to her daughter, the man had never once shown the kind of strength that difficult times demanded. Sarah had always made excuses for him, had always been the one to hold everything together. "Where are the other children?" Rose asked, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "We understand they're at home. Child Services has been notified, and they'll need to assess the situation within 24 hours. Mrs. Gibson, this baby needs someone to take custody tonight. Are you able to?" "I'm coming." The words came out before Rose had fully processed what she was saying. "I'm coming right now." She hung up the phone and sat in the sudden silence, staring at the quilt that would never wrap around Sarah's sleeping form. Her daughter was gone, Sarah, who had called her just hours ago complaining about being uncomfortable. Sarah, who made the world's best cornbread and sang lullabies in a voice like honey. Sarah, who had been Rose's baby before she'd had babies of her own. The grief hit her then. A crushing wave that made her chest tight and her eyes burn with tears that felt too large for her body to contain. But underneath the grief, something else was stirring. Something that felt like the fierce protectiveness that had carried her through 3 decades of single motherhood after her husband's death. 7 children. 6, now that Sarah was gone. 6 children who would wake up tomorrow without a mother, with a father who had already proven he couldn't be counted on. The oldest, Alicia, was 19 and responsible, but still just a girl herself. The youngest was hours old and had never felt her mother's arms. Rose stood on unsteady legs and walked to her bedroom, moving through the motions of getting dressed with the automatic precision of someone in shock. Sensible shoes, her purse, car keys. In the mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself, a 67-year-old woman with silver hair and worried eyes, wearing a cardigan that Sarah had given her last Christmas. "You're too old for this," she whispered to her reflection. "You're supposed to be retired. You're supposed to be the grandmother who spoils them and sends them home." But even as she said it, Rose knew there was no choice to be made. Those children were family. Family didn't get to choose when it was convenient to step up. The drive to Cleveland General passed in a blur of streetlights and terrible clarity. Rose found herself thinking about the practical things. Where would everyone sleep? How would she afford to feed 6 children on her Social Security? Whether her old car could handle the daily runs to school and activities. Her mind latched onto these logistics because the alternative, thinking about Sarah's laugh or the way she used to curl up on Rose's lap when she was small, was too much to bear. The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsh after the soft glow of her reading lamp. A young nurse with kind eyes led Rose through a maze of corridors to the NICU, explaining policies and procedures that Rose barely heard. All she could focus on was the upcoming moment when she would meet Sarah's daughter, the baby who had survived when her mother hadn't. The infant lay in a plastic bassinet, her tiny fists waving in the air. She had Sarah's nose and what looked like it might be Rose's chin. A shock of dark hair stuck up in small spikes, and her eyes, when they opened, were the deep blue that most babies were born with. "Hello, little one," Rose whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm your Grandma Rose." The nurse helped Rose hold the baby, showing her how to support the small head and neck. The weight was so familiar. Rose remembered holding Sarah like this, and before her, Sarah's older siblings, but this time felt different. This wasn't a grandmother's brief cuddle before handing the baby back to its mother. This was the beginning of something permanent and terrifying. "Have you thought about a name?" the nurse asked gently. Rose looked down at the peaceful face, thinking about grace and mercy and second chances. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace." The paperwork took nearly 2 hours. Temporary guardianship, medical authorizations, discharge procedures. Rose signed her name over and over, each signature feeling like another step away from the quiet retirement she'd planned. and towards something she couldn't yet fully comprehend. During the car ride home, Grace slept in the borrowed carrier that the hospital had provided. Rose drove slowly, hyper-aware of her precious cargo and the weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier with each mile. At a red light, she pulled out her phone and called Alicia. The phone rang 6 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Grandma? What's wrong?" "Alicia, honey, I need you to listen carefully. Something's happened to your mama." Rose's voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. "She passed away tonight, during the birth. The baby's fine, but your mama, she's gone, sweetheart." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Rose wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Alicia's voice came back, small and broken. "What do you mean she's gone?" "I mean she died, honey. There were complications, and the doctors couldn't save her." Rose pulled into her driveway, staring at her small house and wondering how it would hold them all. "I have the baby with me. Her name is Grace. I need you to gather your brothers and sisters and bring them here. Can you do that?" Yes, I can do that." Alicia's voice was stronger now, and Rose heard the sound of movement in the background. "Grandma, what about Dad? Where is he?" Rose closed her eyes. "He left the hospital. I don't know where he is right now." Another silence, this one filled with understanding and disappointment that no 19-year-old should have to feel. "Okay, I'll get everyone together and drive them over. It might take a while. Marcus isn't home yet, and I'll have to wake up the little ones. Drive carefully, baby. Take your time." Rose hung up and sat in her car, looking at her house with new eyes. 2 bedrooms for 7 people. A fixed income that would now have to stretch impossibly far. A body that already ached at the end of most days, now facing the prospect of chasing after twin 8-year-olds and caring for a newborn. Grace stirred in her carrier, making the small sounds that newborns make in their sleep. Rose reached back and gently touched the baby's cheek, feeling the incredible softness of new skin. "I don't know how we're going to do this, little one," she whispered. "But we're going to figure it out together." As Rose carried Grace into the house, she caught sight of the yellow quilt still spread across her chair, needles still threaded and waiting. Tomorrow she would finish it. Tonight she would begin the hardest job of her life, becoming a mother again when she'd thought that chapter was closed forever. The weight of stars pressed down from the Cleveland sky, and Rose Gibson stepped across the threshold into a future she'd never planned but couldn't abandon. In her arms, Grace slept peacefully, unaware that her life had just been entrusted to a grandmother whose love would have to be strong enough for both of them. Rose stood in her living room at 3 in the morning, Grace sleeping fitfully in her arms, watching as 6 more lives spilled through her front door like water through a broken dam. Alicia came first, her young face aged by grief and responsibility, carrying a duffel bag, and little Lily, who clung to her like a koala bear. Behind them stumbled the twins, Tyler and Taylor, still in their pajamas, their 8-year-old eyes wide with confusion and fear. Emma followed, her 12-year-old frame hunched under the weight of another bag and what looked like every stuffed animal the children owned. She moved with the careful precision of someone trying to hold herself together through sheer will. Marcus brought up the rear, his 14-year-old swagger undermined by red-rimmed eyes and the way his hands shook as he shoved them deep into his hoodie pockets. "Where's everybody gonna sleep?" Tyler asked, his voice small in the sudden quiet of Rose's living room. The question hung in the air like smoke, making visible what they could all see but hadn't yet spoken aloud. This house that had seemed perfect for a grandmother living alone was impossibly small for 7 people. Rose looked around her home with new eyes. The living room held her recliner, a small sofa that might fit 2 people if they were very close friends, and a coffee table that suddenly seemed like a hazard with small children around. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person to cook in comfortably. Her bedroom could fit her double bed and dresser with about 3 feet to spare. The second bedroom, what she'd optimistically called her sewing room, contained her machine, cutting table, and enough fabric and supplies to stock a small store. "We'll figure it out," Rose said, though she had no idea how. "Right now, everyone needs to get some sleep." "I'm not sleeping here," Marcus announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of teenage defiance that Rose remembered from raising her own children. This is crazy. We should be at our own house, in our own beds. Alicia shot him a look that could have melted steel. And who exactly is going to take care of us there, Marcus? Dad's gone. He left, remember? He'll come back, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He just needs time to process everything. Rose watched this exchange with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a new language. These children had their own dynamics, their own hierarchy and relationships that she was only beginning to glimpse. Alicia clearly saw herself as the responsible one, the bridge between the adults and the younger children. Marcus was angry and looking for someone to blame. The twins were confused and overwhelmed. Emma was trying to be helpful but looked ready to collapse from exhaustion. And Lily, sweet 5-year-old Lily, hadn't said a word since arriving, just pressed herself against Rose's leg like she was afraid to let go. Your mama used to sleep on that sofa when she was about Emma's age, Rose said gently, nodding toward the worn blue cushions. Right after your granddaddy died, and we were figuring out how to make ends meet. Sometimes the best solutions aren't the prettiest ones. She handed Grace to Alicia, noting how naturally the teenager adjusted her arms to support the baby's head. Emma, honey, can you help me clear out the sewing room? We'll put the twins in there for tonight. Alicia, you and Lily can have my bed, and I'll take the recliner. Where am I supposed to sleep? Marcus demanded. Rose looked at him steadily. The sofa pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable enough. This is insane, Marcus muttered, but he was already moving toward the closet where Rose kept her spare bedding. The next hour passed in a blur of activity that reminded Rose of nothing so much as trying to pack for a vacation when you had far too much stuff and not nearly enough suitcase space. They moved her sewing machine into a corner of the living room, stacked her fabric in the closet, and dragged the twins' air mattress from the car. Rose found herself constantly bumping into someone, reaching for sheets at the same time as Emma, nearly stepping on Tyler as he tried to find space for his backpack, apologizing to Alicia for the third time as they maneuvered around each other in the narrow hallway. The twins seemed to view the whole thing as an adventure, bouncing on the air mattress and arguing over who got to sleep next to the window. Their energy was infectious but exhausting. Rose found herself thinking about all the mornings ahead, getting 6 children ready for school, making sure they had clean clothes and lunch money and homework completed. The mental list grew longer with each passing minute. Grandma Rose? Lily's voice was so soft that Rose almost missed it. The little girl stood in the doorway of the sewing room, clutching a worn, stuffed elephant. Is Mama really not coming back? The question hit Rose like a physical blow. She knelt down to Lily's level, ignoring the protest in her aging knees. No, sweetheart. Mama's gone to heaven, and she can't come back from there. Lily's lower lip trembled. But who's going to sing me the butterfly song? Rose's throat tightened. She didn't know what the butterfly song was, didn't know any of the small rituals and traditions that had made up these children's daily lives with their mother. I don't know that song, honey, but maybe you could teach it to me? Instead of answering, Lily pressed herself against Rose's chest, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Rose wrapped her arms around the child, feeling the weight of grief and responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Over Lily's head, she caught sight of Marcus standing in the living room, staring at the pull-out sofa bed with an expression of barely contained rage. Emma was folding and refolding the same towel, her movements sharp and anxious. Alicia sat in the recliner with Grace, her 19-year-old face carrying the weight of someone much older. This wasn't going to work. The house was too small, her energy was already flagging, and she had no idea how to help these children process their grief while dealing with her own. Every practical concern seemed insurmountable. How would she afford groceries for 7 people on her fixed income? Where would she find car seats and high chairs and all the equipment that came with raising children? How could she possibly manage the logistics of 6 different schedules and 6 different sets of needs? A crash from the sewing room interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Tyler's voice followed immediately. It wasn't me. Taylor pushed the lamp. I did not. You were being a stupid head. Boys, Alicia called sharply, knock it off. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rose gently disentangled herself from Lily and hurried to assess the damage. The small lamp from her sewing table lay in pieces on the floor, its blue ceramic base shattered beyond repair. It had been a gift from Sarah 3 Christmases ago, chosen because Sarah said the color reminded her of Rose's eyes. "I'm sorry, Grandma," Tyler said, his voice small. "We were just playing spaceship, and the lamp got in the way." Rose stared at the broken pieces, feeling something crack inside her chest. It was just a lamp, replaceable, ultimately unimportant. But it had been Sarah's gift, chosen with love and care, and now it was gone, just like Sarah herself. "It's okay," she heard herself saying, though her voice sounded strange. "Accidents happen." But as she knelt to pick up the pieces, Rose felt the first real wave of anger since the phone call. Not at the boys. They were 8 years old and traumatized and acting exactly like 8-year-old boys would act. She was angry at David for running away, at the situation that had thrust her into this impossible position, at the unfairness of losing her daughter and gaining a responsibility that felt too large for her aging body and fixed income. "Let me help," Emma said, appearing beside her with a dustpan. "Thank you, sweetheart." Rose accepted the help, noting how Emma's hands shook as she held the dustpan steady. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded quickly, but Rose could see the lie in her rigid posture. None of them were okay. How could they be? The knock at the front door came just as Rose was disposing of the lamp pieces. Through the front window, she could see a woman about her own age standing on the porch, holding what looked like a casserole dish. "That's Mrs. Henderson," Emma said. "She lives next door to us. To our old house, I mean." Rose opened the door to find a woman with steel gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Rose Gibson?" "I'm Margaret Henderson. I heard about Sarah from Pastor Johnson, and She gestured helplessly with the casserole dish. "I thought you could use some help." The simple kindness of the gesture nearly undid Rose completely. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mrs. Henderson. Please, come in." Margaret stepped into the crowded living room, taking in the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The pull-out sofa, the children scattered around the small space, the obvious signs of a household in crisis. "Lord have mercy," she murmured. "You've got your hands full, don't you?" "We're managing," Rose said, though the words felt hollow. Margaret fixed her with a look that brooked no nonsense. "Honey, I raised my own grandchildren when my daughter couldn't. Started when I was 71 years old. You don't have to pretend with me." The understanding in Margaret's voice was Rose's undoing. The tears she'd been holding back since the phone call finally came, silent streams down her cheeks that she wiped away with shaking hands. "I don't know what I'm doing," Rose whispered. "I don't know how to help them, and I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Margaret set the casserole dish on the coffee table and placed a warm hand on Rose's shoulder. "Strong enough? Honey, you got 6 grieving children under your roof at 3 in the morning. You're stronger than you know." She looked around the room, taking in each child with the assessing eye of someone who understood the complexities of sudden guardianship. "What you need right now is practical help. First thing tomorrow, we're going to call Pastor Johnson and get the church ladies organized. You're going to need beds, clothes, school supplies, and about 50 other things you haven't thought of yet." Quote, "I can't ask for charity," Rose protested. "You're not asking, I'm offering. And when my grandchildren were small and I was struggling, your daughter Sarah brought me meals every week for 2 months. She never made a big show of it, just quietly helped when help was needed." Margaret's voice was firm but gentle. "That's what community does, Rose. We take care of each other." Marcus, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "We don't need charity. We'll be fine on our own." Margaret turned to look at him, her expression neither condescending nor dismissive. "Son, accepting help isn't the same as being weak," Your grandmother here is taking on the job of raising 6 children when most women her age are thinking about easy crossword puzzles and afternoon naps. That takes more strength than most people have in their whole bodies. She's not our grandmother, Marcus said, his voice sharp with pain. She's our mom's mom, and our mom is dead. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rose felt the truth of them settle in her chest. She wasn't their grandmother in the way that mattered. She was the person who happened to be available when their world fell apart. You're right, Rose said quietly. I'm not your mom, and I'm not trying to replace her. But I'm here, and I love you, and I'm going to do everything I can to take care of you. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his 14-year-old face cycling through emotions too complex for his young features to contain. Finally, he turned and walked out the front door, letting it slam behind him. Marcus, Alicia called, starting to get up from the chair. Let him go, Margaret said gently. He needs to walk off some of that anger, and he'll come back when he's ready. Boys that age, sometimes they need to feel like they have some control over something, even if it's just where they go to think. Rose sank into the nearest chair, suddenly feeling every one of her 67 years. What if he doesn't come back? What if I can't handle this? What if I'm making a terrible mistake? Margaret pulled up another chair and sat down facing Rose. Honey, there's no manual for this kind of situation. You're going to make mistakes, and some days are going to be harder than others. But love is a powerful thing, and that house of yours might be small, but it's already bigger in the ways that matter than the one they just lost. She gestured around the room, where the children had gradually settled into their temporary sleeping arrangements. Lily had curled up on the floor next to Rose's chair, using her stuffed elephant as a pillow. The twins were finally quiet, sharing the air mattress and whispering to each other in the way that twins do. Emma sat on the edge of the pull-out sofa, carefully folding and refolding baby clothes that someone had brought from the other house. Alicia remained in the recliner with Grace, humming softly to keep the baby calm. They need you, Margaret said simply. And whether you feel ready or not, you're what they've got. That makes you exactly what they need. As if summoned by her words, the front door opened quietly, and Marcus slipped back inside. He didn't say anything, just grabbed a pillow from the sofa and stretched out on the floor near the twins. But his return felt like a small victory, a recognition that this chaotic, cramped, imperfect arrangement was still better than the alternatives. Rose looked around her transformed home. Too small for 7 people, but somehow holding them all anyway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about logistics and legalities, and how to make everything work. But tonight, they were all under one roof, safe and together. Margaret squeezed Rose's hand before she left. You call me if you need anything, you hear, and I'll be back tomorrow with reinforcements. After she was gone, Rose turned off the lights and settled into her recliner, listening to the sounds of 6 children trying to find sleep in an unfamiliar place. Grace fussed softly from Alicia's arms, and Rose could hear whispered conversations from the sewing room, where the twins were processing the day's events. In their own 8-year-old way, the house felt different now, fuller, louder, charged with the particular energy that comes from lives in transition. Rose closed her eyes and tried to imagine the days ahead: school registrations and grocery shopping, bedtime stories and homework help, teenage drama and toddler tantrums. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, Rose felt something else stirring, the same fierce protectiveness that had carried her through raising 3 children as a young widow. These 6 souls had been entrusted to her care, and she would find a way to be worthy of that trust. In the morning, she would start making lists and phone calls. She would figure out the practical details that would allow them to build a life together. But for now, she simply sat in the darkness, listening to the breathing of 6 children who needed her to be stronger than she felt, and promised herself that somehow she would be. The knock came at exactly 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, 3 days after the children had moved in. Rose had been expecting it, dreading it really, but the sharp rap on her front door still made her stomach clench with anxiety. Through the window, she could see a woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard, her expression professionally neutral, in the way that made Rose's hands shake. "That's the social worker," Emma whispered from her position at the kitchen table, where she was helping Lily eat cereal while simultaneously trying to keep Grace's bottle warm. At 12 years old, Emma had already mastered the art of managing multiple crises simultaneously, a skill that made Rose's heart ache with recognition of how much childhood this girl had already lost. Rose smoothed her cardigan and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. She'd been awake since 5, preparing for this moment. The house was as clean as she could make it, with 6 children living in it, though toys still littered the living room, and the distinctive smell of formula and diapers had already begun to permeate the air. "Where's Marcus?" Rose asked, though she already knew the answer. The 14-year-old had left the house at dawn, claiming he was going to school but walking in the opposite direction. His empty bed, the pull-out sofa that had become his reluctant domain, served as a reminder of how precarious their situation really was. "He said he'd be back," Alicia offered from the recliner, where she was feeding Grace, "but you know how he gets." Rose did know, and that knowledge sat like a stone in her stomach, as she opened the door to face Jennifer Walsh, MSW, from Cuyahoga County Children and Family Services. "Mrs. Gibson? I'm Jennifer Walsh. We spoke on the phone yesterday about the temporary custody arrangement for the Gibson children." The woman's voice was kind but businesslike, and Rose caught her taking in details with the practiced eye of someone trained to assess living situations. The cramped entryway, the sounds of children arguing from the kitchen, the general chaos that seemed to follow 6 grieving kids like weather. "Please come in," Rose said, stepping aside. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "That would be lovely, thank you." Jennifer followed Rose into the living room, her pen already moving across the clipboard as she noted the sleeping arrangements, the toys scattered across every available surface, the general sense of a household barely containing itself. Rose poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly, hyper-aware of every sound from the other room. Tyler's loud complaints about his cereal being mushy, Taylor's equally loud defense of his breakfast choices, and Lily's quiet sniffles that had become her constant soundtrack since her mother's death. "As I mentioned on the phone, this is just a preliminary assessment," Jennifer said, accepting the coffee and settling onto the sofa that doubled as Marcus's bed. "We need to ensure that the children are safe and that you have adequate resources to care for them long-term." Long-term. The words hit Rose like a physical blow. In the chaos of the past 3 days, she'd been operating in crisis mode, dealing with immediate needs and trying to keep everyone fed and relatively clean. But long-term meant years. It meant raising 6 children from ages newborn to 19, seeing them through school and college applications and first heartbreaks, and all the 1,000 small disasters that comprised growing up. "Of course," Rose managed. "I understand you have a job to do." Jennifer's pen scratched across the paper as she asked about income, living arrangements, and Rose's health status. Each question felt like a small indictment. Yes, she was living on a fixed income that would now need to stretch impossibly far. Yes, the house was too small. Yes, she was 67 years old and had already raised her own children decades ago. "Where are the children now?" Jennifer asked, glancing toward the kitchen where the noise level had escalated to include what sounded like a full-scale argument about whose turn it was to use the blue bowl. "Emma and Lily are finishing breakfast, the twins are." Rose paused as a crash emanated from the kitchen, followed by Alicia's sharp voice telling someone to clean up their mess. "The twins are being 8-year-olds. Alicia is helping with the baby, and Marcus." She faltered, unwilling to admit that she had no idea where the angry teenager had gone. "Marcus isn't here." Jennifer's pen stopped moving, and Rose caught the sharp attention in her voice. "He went to school early," Rose lied, praying that Marcus would somehow materialize before Jennifer asked to see him. The front door slammed open as if summoned by Rose's desperate thoughts. But instead of Marcus appearing with a reasonable explanation for his absence, he stumbled through the doorway with the unmistakable swagger of someone trying to hide the fact that he was high. "Shit," he muttered, catching sight of Jennifer on the sofa. Sorry." Rose felt her heart sink into her shoes. Marcus's eyes were glassy, his movements just slightly off, and the smell of marijuana clung to his clothes like cologne. In front of the social worker, who held their family's future in her hands, he looked exactly like what he was, a grieving, angry teenager making terrible decisions. "Marcus," Rose said carefully, "this is Ms. Walsh from Children's Services. She's here to talk with all of us about our living situation." Marcus slumped against the doorframe, his 14-year-old face cycling through emotions too complex for his features to contain. "Yeah. Well, you can tell her this whole thing is fucked up. We shouldn't be here. We should be in our own house with our own dad, but he split because he's a coward." "Marcus!" Alicia's voice cracked like a whip from across the room. "Shut up and sit down." "Don't tell me what to do," Marcus shot back. "You're not my mother. She's dead, remember?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rose watched Jennifer's pen move across her clipboard, noting everything. The boy's obvious substance use, his defiant attitude, the family dynamics that were clearly still in chaos. Each mark felt like another nail in the coffin of Rose's hopes of keeping them together. "Marcus, why don't you go clean up and then come back to talk with us?" Rose suggested, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever," Marcus muttered, but he shuffled toward the bathroom, leaving behind the lingering scent of poor choices and adolescent rebellion. Jennifer cleared her throat delicately. "Mrs. Gibson, I can see that this is a challenging situation. The children are clearly struggling with their grief, and adolescents often act out during traumatic transitions. However, I do need to ask about your plan for addressing Marcus's substance use and behavioral issues." Rose felt the weight of judgment settling on her shoulders like a heavy coat. She was failing, and it had only been 3 days. How could she possibly convince this woman, this system, that she was capable of handling 6 children when she couldn't even keep one teenager from smoking pot before breakfast? "I know this looks bad," Rose began, but her words were interrupted by another knock at the door. Through the window, Rose could see Pastor Johnson's familiar figure, and relief flooded through her like cool water. He'd been her spiritual advisor for more than 20 years, had officiated at her husband's funeral and Sarah's wedding, and his presence felt like a lifeline in the churning chaos of her mourning. "Excuse me," Rose said to Jennifer, hurrying to open the door. "Rose, dear," Pastor Johnson said, his warm voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to bringing comfort to difficult situations. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by. I wanted to check on you and the children." "Please, come in," Rose said gratefully. "Ms. Walsh, this is Pastor Johnson from Mount Calvary Baptist." "Pastor, this is Jennifer Walsh from Children's Services." Pastor Johnson shook Jennifer's hand with the easy confidence of someone who had dealt with social workers before. "Ms. Walsh, it's good to meet you. I imagine you're here to assess Rose's situation with the children." "That's correct," Jennifer replied, and Rose caught the slight shift in her tone. Still professional, but somehow more respectful in the presence of obvious community support. "I've known Rose Gibson for over 2 decades, Pastor Johnson said, settling into the chair beside Jennifer with the unhurried manner of someone prepared to stay as long as necessary. "She raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband's death, put them all through school, and has been a pillar of our church community ever since. If there's anyone in this city capable of providing these children with the love and stability they need, it's Rose." Jennifer nodded politely, but Rose could see her weighing the pastor's words against what she'd observed: the overcrowded house, the chaotic morning, Marcus's obvious problems. "I appreciate your insight, Pastor Johnson. However, I do have concerns about the practical aspects of this arrangement. 6 children is a significant responsibility for anyone, but especially for someone Mrs. Gibson's age." "Age brings wisdom," Pastor Johnson replied gently. "And our congregation is committed to supporting Rose and these children in whatever ways are needed. We've already organized meal trains, clothing donations, and volunteer assistance. This isn't a burden Rose is carrying alone." As if to underscore his point, Marcus emerged from the bathroom looking marginally more presentable, his hair combed and his shirt changed. He glanced at Pastor Johnson with something that might have been respect. The teenager had always responded better to the pastor's quiet authority than to more confrontational approaches. "Marcus," Pastor Johnson said warmly, "how are you holding up, son?" "I'm fine," Marcus mumbled. but he sat down on the edge of the pull-out sofa without being asked, his earlier defiance replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Jennifer made more notes, and Rose tried to read her expression. Was the pastor's presence helping their case? Or did the need for community intervention just highlight how inadequate Rose was for this enormous task? "Ms. Walsh," Rose said quietly, "I know this isn't ideal. I know I'm older than most guardians, and I know this house is too small. But these children need stability, and they need love, and I can give them both of those things." Jennifer looked around the room, at Alicia holding Grace with practiced ease, at Emma helping Lily with her shoes in the hallway, at the twins who had appeared in the doorway to listen to the grown-up conversation with wide, worried eyes. Finally, her gaze settled on Marcus, who was staring at his hands but clearly paying attention to every word. "Mrs. Gibson," Jennifer said carefully, "I can see that you love these children, and it's clear they care about you. However, there are requirements you'll need to meet if this arrangement is going to continue. The house will need safety modifications for the baby, Marcus will need to enroll in counseling for his substance use, and we'll need to see evidence of adequate financial resources and support systems." Rose nodded, her throat tight with relief and terror in equal measure. Requirements meant possibility. Requirements meant they weren't being separated immediately. "I'll do whatever is necessary," Rose said simply. Jennifer gathered her papers and stood to leave. "I'll be back in 2 weeks for a follow-up visit. Please make sure all the children are present for that meeting." As the door closed behind her, Rose sank into her chair, feeling every one of her 67 years. Pastor Johnson placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did well, Rose. This is just the beginning." She looked around at the 6 faces depending on her, some hopeful, some scared, all waiting to see what came next. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her, but underneath it, Rose felt something else growing. Determination. The system might doubt her, but she knew something they didn't. Love had no age limit, and family wasn't defined by convenience or ideal circumstances. It was defined by showing up, day after day. When showing up was the hardest thing in the world, she was going to fight for them, all of them. Especially when, the odds seemed impossible. 2 weeks after Jennifer Walsh's first visit, Rose was folding laundry in her bedroom when the phone rang with news that made her blood run cold. Marcus had been arrested for shoplifting at the corner store 3 blocks from school. "We need a guardian to come down and sign for his release," the police officer explained in a tone that suggested this wasn't his first call about a troubled teenager. "He's claiming his grandmother is his legal guardian?" Rose's hands shook as she grabbed her keys, her mind racing through the implications. Jennifer Walsh was scheduled for her follow-up visit tomorrow morning, the evaluation that would determine whether the children could stay with her permanently. An arrest record would be devastating to their case. "Alicia, I need you to watch everyone," Rose called, rushing toward the door. "I'll be back as soon as I can." At the police station, Marcus sat in a plastic chair looking smaller than his 14 years, his defiant swagger replaced by something that looked like shame. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. Grief had stolen his appetite along with everything else. "What were you thinking?" Rose asked quietly as they walked to her car after the paperwork was complete. "I wasn't," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this, Grandma. I don't know how to wake up every day knowing she's never coming back." Rose stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time since Sarah's death, she saw past his anger to the broken boy underneath. "Neither do I, sweetheart," she said softly. "But we're gonna figure it out together." Tomorrow, Jennifer Walsh would return to a house harboring a juvenile offender. Tonight, Rose would have to find the strength to save a family that seemed determined to break apart. It was 3 a.m. when Grace's fever spiked to 103 degrees. Rose had been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, dealing with the aftermath of Marcus's arrest and Jennifer Walsh's stern warnings about, quote, additional incidents. Her body felt like it was moving through molasses as she paced the living room, trying to calm the screaming infant whose tiny face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Shh, baby girl," Rose whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Grandma's here. Grandma's got you." But her arms were shaking from fatigue, and the room seemed to tilt sideways as she stood. She'd been running on adrenaline and coffee for weeks, catching sleep in 20-minute intervals between feedings and diaper changes, and the constant demands of 5 other children who needed her attention. "Rose?" Alicia appeared in the doorway, her 19-year-old face creased with worry. "Is she okay?" "Her fever won't break," Rose managed, though the words felt thick on her tongue. "I think we need to." The world went black. Rose came to on the emergency room floor, surrounded by the controlled chaos of medical professionals, who spoke in clipped, urgent tones. Dr. Patricia Williams knelt beside her, checking her pulse with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been Rose's physician for the past 15 years. "Mrs. Gibson, can you hear me? You collapsed at home." Alicia called the ambulance. Rose tried to sit up, panic flooding through her as she remembered. "Grace, where's Grace? Is she—" "The baby is fine. Her fever broke with medication, and she's being monitored. But Rose, we need to talk about you." Dr. Williams' voice carried the gentle firmness that Rose recognized from previous health scares. "Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, you're severely dehydrated, and your body is showing signs of extreme stress." Rose closed her eyes, feeling the weight of failure settle on her chest like a stone. She'd lasted exactly 1 month of trying to be everything these children needed, and her body had betrayed her. "I can't stop," she whispered. "They need me. Rose, listen to me." Dr. Williams moved closer, her voice dropping to the tone she used for difficult conversations. "You're 67 years old, and you're trying to do the job of someone half your age. Your body is telling you to slow down before it makes that decision for you. But the children will need you to be alive and healthy more than they need you to be perfect." Dr. Williams helped Rose sit up slowly, and prescribing mandatory rest, 8 hours of sleep, proper meals, and help with the daily responsibilities. No negotiation. Rose looked through the emergency room window toward the waiting area, where she could see Alicia holding Grace while the other children clustered around Mrs. Henderson, who had clearly been called in as backup. Even Marcus was there, his usual sullen expression replaced by genuine concern. "They're scared," Rose said. "They're resilient," Dr. Williams corrected. "But they need their guardian to take care of herself so she can take care of them. This isn't sustainable, Rose. Something has to change." The truth of those words settled in Rose's chest like a physical weight. She'd been so focused on proving she could handle everything alone that she'd forgotten the most important lesson of parenthood. Sometimes asking for help was the strongest thing you could do. Through the window, she watched Emma carefully organizing the other children's belongings, while Tyler tried to make Lily laugh. They were taking care of each other because they'd learned they couldn't always count on the adults to be strong enough. That had to change. Starting now. 2 weeks after Rose's collapse at the hospital, she was finally beginning to feel like they'd found their rhythm. Mrs. Henderson had organized a rotation of church ladies who helped with meals and childcare. Emma had taken over much of Grace's daily care with the competence of someone twice her age. And even Marcus had started coming home before dark most days. The house still felt too small, the budget remained impossibly tight, but there was something that resembled stability beginning to take root. Then David Gibson showed up at her front door on a Tuesday afternoon, looking like a man who'd spent the past 6 weeks sleeping in his car. Rose was feeding Grace her afternoon bottle when the knock came, not the gentle rap of neighbors or the official precision of social workers, but an uncertain, hesitant sound that made her stomach tighten with recognition. Through the peephole, she saw her son-in-law's familiar profile, though he looked thinner than she remembered, his usually neat beard now scraggly and unkempt. "Emma, take the baby," Rose said quietly, handing Grace to the 12-year-old who had become her most reliable helper. "And keep the other children in the back room until I call for them." Emma's eyes widened with understanding, and Rose watched her gather the twins and Lily with the efficient movements of someone who'd learned to manage crisis situations. The fact that a 12-year-old had developed such skills made Rose's heart ache, but there was no time for that now. Rose opened the door to find David shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man preparing to run. He looked older than his 47 years, his eyes carrying the haunted quality of someone who'd spent weeks trying to outrun his own grief. "Rose," he said, his voice rough with disuse. Can I come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly, watching as he took in the transformed living room. The pack-and-play in one corner, children's toys scattered across every surface, the general organized chaos that came with housing 6 kids in a space meant for one elderly woman. "They're all here?" David asked, though he already knew the answer. "Where else would they be?" Rose's voice came out sharper than she'd intended, but 6 weeks of anger and exhaustion had worn away her usual diplomacy. "You left them, David. You walked out of that hospital and left them." "I know." He sank onto the edge of the pull-out sofa that had become Marcus's bed, his head in his hands. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But Rose, I couldn't. When they told me Sarah was gone, I just couldn't think straight. I couldn't breathe." "You think the rest of us could?" Rose shot back. "You think it was easy for me to take on 6 children at my age? You think they weren't devastated and confused and needing their father?" "I want to make it right," David said, looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I want to take them home. I want to be the father they deserve." Before Rose could respond, footsteps thundered down the hallway as the children, apparently unwilling to stay hidden any longer, burst into the living room. Lily reached David first, launching herself into his arms with the uninhibited joy of a 5-year-old who didn't yet understand the complexities of abandonment. "Daddy!" she cried, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "You came back!" The twins were more cautious, hanging back near the hallway entrance, but their faces showed the conflict Rose felt in her own chest. Hope warring with hurt, love complicated by the memory of being left behind. Emma appeared in the doorway holding Grace, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was processing too many emotions to show any of them safely. Behind her, Alicia emerged from the kitchen, her 19-year-old face showing a hardness that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. "Where have you been?" Alicia asked, her voice carrying an edge that could have cut glass. I needed time to figure things out," David said, still holding Lily but clearly struggling with how to explain 6 weeks of absence to children who'd needed him most during the worst time of their lives. "We all needed time," Marcus said from the front door, having apparently slipped in while no one was watching. "But we didn't get to run away." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. David's face crumpled, and Rose watched him truly see his children for the first time since arriving. Emma caring for a baby who should have been his responsibility, Alicia acting like an adult before her time, Marcus carrying anger that was too big for his 14-year-old frame, the twins uncertain whether to trust the man who'd promised never to leave them. "I know I messed up," David said finally. "I know I let you all down. But I'm here now, and I want to take you home. I want us to be a family again." "We are a family," Taylor said quietly. "Here. With Grandma Rose." Rose felt something break open in her chest at the simple declaration. These children, who had every right to run back to their father and the familiar comfort of their old house, were choosing her, choosing this cramped, chaotic, imperfect arrangement over the easier path. "Dad," Alicia said carefully, "where have you been staying?" David's silence answered the question more clearly than words could have. Rose saw the moment when even Lily, still perched in his lap, began to understand that her father hadn't just been absent. He'd been lost. "I'm getting my life together," David said quickly. "I've got a job lined up, and I'm looking at apartments. Just give me a few more weeks, and I can provide for you all properly." "A few more weeks?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Grandma Rose didn't get a few more weeks to figure it out. She just did it." Rose watched David's face cycle through emotions: shame, defensive anger, a desperate kind of hope that looked painful to carry. She recognized the look of a man who wanted to be better than he was, but didn't know how to bridge the gap between intention and action. "David," Rose said gently, "why don't you stay for dinner? The children have a lot to tell you about school and their new routines." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a door left slightly open. As David nodded gratefully and Lily chattered about her new friend at kindergarten, Rose caught sight of Emma watching the whole scene with the careful attention of someone learning to protect herself from disappointment. The afternoon stretched into evening, filled with the normal chaos of homework and meal preparation and bedtime routines. David helped where he could, but Rose noticed how he seemed overwhelmed by the simple logistics of caring for 6 children. The constant negotiations over bathroom time, the careful orchestration of bedtime stories and snack requests, and the dozen small conflicts that arose when exhausted children tried to share limited space. By the time the younger children were in bed, David looked like a man who'd run a marathon. He sat on the front porch with Rose, watching the Cleveland streetlights flicker on as the September evening grew cool. "I don't know how you do it," he admitted quietly. "I couldn't handle one night, and you've been doing this for 6 weeks." "You learn," Rose said simply. "You adapt because you have to." "What if I can't?" The question came out so quietly Rose almost missed it. "What if I'm not strong enough to be what they need?" Rose studied his profile in the dim porch light, seeing the man Sarah had married but also recognizing the fundamental weakness that had always worried her about her son-in-law. "Then you step aside and let someone else do it." David left the next morning after breakfast, promising to call soon and visit regularly. The children's reactions varied. Lily cried. The twins seemed relieved. Emma remained carefully neutral. Alicia looked skeptical. And Marcus muttered something under his breath that Rose pretended not to hear. As David's car disappeared around the corner, Rose felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The children needed their father, but they needed stability more. They needed someone who would show up every day, not just when guilt or loneliness drove them back. "Is he coming back?" Lily asked, tugging on Rose's sweater. Rose knelt down to the little girl's level, looking into eyes that were learning too young that adults didn't always keep their promises. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't the answer Lily wanted, but it was the truth. And in Rose's experience, truth, however difficult, was always stronger than false hope. The house felt different after David's visit, charged with questions about belonging and permanence that hadn't existed before. But as Rose tucked Lily in that night and listened to the familiar sounds of 6 children settling into sleep, she realized something had shifted. They'd all been tested, her commitment, the children's trust, the fragile bonds they'd been building, and they'd survived. They were becoming something new together, something that didn't depend on David's presence or absence to define itself. They were becoming a family. Emma stood in the doorway of the kitchen, her school backpack still slung over one shoulder, watching Rose fold laundry at the dining room table. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the careful way Rose's weathered hands smoothed each small shirt and tiny pair of pants. 6 months had passed since that terrible night when everything changed, and the rhythm of their daily life had found its own peculiar cadence. "Grandma Rose?" Emma's voice carried a hesitation that made Rose look up immediately. At 12, Emma had developed an intuition for reading the household's emotional temperature, and Rose had learned to pay attention to those subtle shifts in her tone. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma shifted her weight from foot to foot, a gesture that reminded Rose so much of Sarah at that age that her chest tightened. "Mrs. Patterson called me to her office today. She said they're doing Charlotte's Web for the spring play, and she wants me to audition for Charlotte." Rose set down the small pink t-shirt she'd been folding, one of Lily's favorites with a unicorn on the front. "Emma, that's wonderful news. You love that book." "I know, but..." Emma's voice trailed off as she finally dropped her backpack and moved closer to the table. "I don't think I should do it. You've got enough to worry about with everyone else, and plays mean rehearsals after school and costumes and..." "Stop right there." Rose's voice carried the gentle authority she'd perfected over the past months. "You're not making decisions based on what you think I can or can't handle. Are you interested in this play?" Emma's eyes lit up despite herself. "Mrs. Patterson says Charlotte is brave and wise and saves everyone, even though she's just a spider. She says I have the right voice for it. Steady, but kind." Rose smiled, remembering how Emma had read that book aloud to the twins just last week, doing different voices for each character. "Then you're going to audition. End of discussion." "But Grandma Rose..." "Emma Grace, listen to me." Rose reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hands. "Your mama would be so proud to see you on that stage. And so will I. We'll figure out the rest." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door slamming, followed by Marcus's voice calling out, "I'm home!" His tone had changed over the past few months. Less defiant, more like he was actually announcing his presence rather than challenging anyone to object to it. "In here," Rose called back, and Marcus appeared in the doorway, his dark hair still damp from basketball practice. At 14, he'd grown 3 inches since coming to live with Rose, and his shoulders had broadened with the confidence that came from finding his place on the school team. "What's going on?" he asked, noting the serious expressions on both faces. "Emma got chosen to audition for the lead in the school play," Rose explained. "We're discussing logistics." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Charlotte's Web? Cool. Emma does all the voices when she reads to the little ones." He grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl on the counter. "What's the problem?" "There's no problem," Rose said firmly. "Emma's going to audition, and we're going to support her." "I just don't want to be a burden," Emma said quietly. Marcus stopped mid-bite of his apple. "Emma, you help more around here than anyone. You make sure the twins brush their teeth, you help Lily with her nightmares, you even help me with my math homework sometimes. If you want to be in a play, we'll make it work." Rose felt a surge of pride at Marcus's words. The angry, defiant boy who'd arrived 6 months ago had gradually revealed himself to be fiercely protective of his family, especially his younger siblings. "See?" Rose said. "Now, when are auditions?" "Next Friday after school," Emma said, her resistance beginning to crumble. "But Mrs. Patterson says if I get the part, I'll need to stay after school 3 days a week for rehearsals, and there's a costume, and parents have to come to the performance." "Hold on," Marcus interrupted. "Did you just say parents have to come?" His voice carried a note of something Rose couldn't quite identify. "Well, family," Emma corrected quickly. "Mrs. Patterson said family." Rose watched Marcus's face carefully. Since David's brief and disastrous return 2 months ago, Marcus had been more sensitive about family definitions and who belonged where. "We're your family," Rose said simply. "All of us. And we'll be there in the front row." The twins chose that moment to burst through the kitchen door, their faces flushed from playing outside. Tyler's shirt was grass-stained, and Taylor had leaves in her hair. "Grandma Rose!" Tyler announced breathlessly. "We saw Mrs. Henderson in her garden, and she said she has something for you." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the back door, holding a covered dish. At 72, she'd become Rose's closest confidant and most practical advisor. "Hope you don't mind me using the back door," she said, bustling in with the easy familiarity of someone who'd earned her place in their daily routine. "I brought that casserole recipe you wanted to try, and I couldn't help but overhear some excitement about a school play." "Emma's going to audition to be Charlotte," Rose explained. "We were just discussing the details." Mrs. Henderson's face lit up. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I remember when my granddaughter played Charlotte 20 years ago. Such a beautiful story." She set the casserole on the counter and turned to Emma. "You know, I still have her costume in my cedar chest. Might need some adjustments, but the foundation is solid." "Mrs. Henderson, you don't need to," Emma began. "Nonsense. What's the point of keeping these things if we don't use them for something meaningful?" She turned to Rose. "And I suppose you'll need help with transportation for rehearsals?" Rose felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that came with accepting help, but she'd learned over the past months that refusing assistance was often more prideful than practical. "That would be incredibly helpful." "Consider it done. Pastor Johnson mentioned last Sunday that the church van could use more regular trips. This gives him a perfect excuse." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. "You know, Mrs. Patterson mentioned they need help building sets. I could probably do that. I've been learning some carpentry stuff in shop class." Rose stared at him. "You want to help with the play?" Marcus shrugged, but his cheeks reddened slightly. "Emma's been helping me with algebra." Figured I could return the favor. The kitchen fell silent except for the twins whispering to each other about whether Charlotte was a good spider or a scary spider. Rose looked around at the faces surrounding her. Mrs. Henderson's encouraging smile, Marcus's awkward generosity, Emma's growing excitement, and the twins' innocent curiosity. "Well then," Rose said finally, "I guess we're putting on a play." Emma's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Really? You think we can do it?" "Sweetheart," Rose said, pulling her granddaughter into a hug. 6 months ago I thought I couldn't raise 6 children. Now look at us. If we can survive the great crayon incident of March and Marcus's cooking experiment that nearly burned down the kitchen, we can certainly handle a school play." "Hey!" Marcus protested, but he was grinning. "That was supposed to be pancakes. How was I supposed to know the smoke detector was so sensitive?" Mrs. Henderson laughed. "Rose Gibson, you've turned into quite the family manager. Sarah would be so proud." The mention of Sarah brought a moment of quiet to the kitchen. Rose felt the familiar ache in her chest, but it was softer now, mixed with something that felt like gratitude. Sarah wasn't here to see Emma's potential triumph, but Rose was. And somehow, that had to be enough. "All right," Rose said, clapping her hands together. "Emma, you're going to audition on Friday. Mrs. Henderson will gratefully accept the costume and the transportation help. Marcus, you'll talk to Mrs. Patterson about helping with sets. And Tyler and Taylor, you're going to be the best audience members this side of Cleveland." "What about Lily?" Emma asked. "And Grace?" "Lily can help me practice my lines," Emma said. "She's good at listening. And Grace will probably sleep through the whole thing." "Perfect," Rose said. "Now let's get started on homework before dinner. We have a play to prepare for." As the children dispersed to their various activities, Mrs. Henderson lingered in the kitchen. "You know, Rose," she said quietly, "watching you with these children, you've found your calling all over again." Rose looked out the window at the twins playing in the small backyard, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "I never thought I'd be raising children again at 67. But you're right, this feels like what I'm supposed to be doing." "Even on the hard days?" "Especially on the hard days." Rose smiled. "Sarah used to say that love isn't about the easy moments. It's about showing up when showing up is hard. I'm finally understanding what she meant." Mrs. Henderson patted Rose's shoulder. "That girl raised you as much as you raised her, didn't she?" "She did," Rose agreed. "And now she's still teaching me through these children. Even when she's not here, she's still here." Outside, Emma was already practicing her audition piece, her clear voice carrying through the window as she read Charlotte's words about friendship and sacrifice. Rose listened, thinking about spiders and webs and the invisible threads that connected all of them in this small house on Maple Street. Sometimes the most beautiful things came from the most unexpected places. Rose was folding Grace's tiny clothes when Alicia burst through the front door, her face flushed with excitement and something else, something that made Rose's stomach tighten with recognition. It was the same expression Sarah had worn years ago when she'd gotten her first job offer, that mixture of joy and terror that came with life-changing possibilities. "Grandma Rose, I need to tell you something," Alicia said, dropping her backpack by the door with less care than usual. At 19, she'd developed the controlled demeanor of someone who'd learned to manage crisis, but today her composure was cracking. "What is it, sweetheart?" Rose set down Grace's pink onesie and gave Alicia her full attention. In the 8 months since she'd taken in the children, she'd learned to read the subtle differences in their voices, and this tone meant something significant. Alicia pulled a thick envelope from her jacket pocket, her hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Williams from the admissions office at Case Western called me to her office today. They have a special program, the Phoenix Scholar Initiative, for students who had to leave school due to family emergencies." Rose's heart began to race. She'd watched Alicia these past months, seen how she'd thrown herself into helping manage the household, how she'd studied for her CNA certification through online courses, while simultaneously becoming Rose's lieutenant in caring for the younger children. But she'd also seen the way Alicia looked at her old textbooks, the wistful expression when she helped Emma with science homework. "They're offering me a full scholarship," Alicia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tuition, room, board, even a small stipend for expenses. I could finish my nursing degree. Rose felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced when David had left, when Marcus had been arrested, when Dr. Williams had warned her about her health. It was the weight of loving someone so much that their happiness mattered more than your own survival. "Alicia, that's wonderful news," Rose said, and meant it, even as her mind immediately began calculating how she would manage without her oldest granddaughter's help. "But I can't accept it," Alicia said quickly. "I can't leave you to handle everything alone. The twins alone are a full-time job. And with Grace getting into everything now, and Marcus still needing someone to keep him on track." "Stop right there," Rose interrupted, using the same gentle authority she'd perfected with the other children. "You're not making this decision based on what you think I can or can't handle. The question is, do you want to go back to school?" Alicia's composure finally cracked and tears began streaming down her face. "Of course I want to go back to school. I want to be a nurse. I want to help people. But I can't abandon you, Grandma Rose. You didn't abandon us." Rose stood up and pulled Alicia into her arms, feeling how thin her granddaughter had become over the past months. Alicia had been carrying too much weight, and Rose had been too overwhelmed to notice. "Listen to me," Rose said softly. "Your mama would be so proud of you for getting this opportunity. And she'd be furious with me if I let you turn it down out of some misguided sense of duty. But who's going to help you?" Alicia asked, her voice muffled against Rose's shoulder. "Emma's still just 12, and Marcus is finally doing well, but he's not ready for this kind of responsibility." Rose pulled back to look at her granddaughter's face. "We'll figure it out. We always do." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the back door opening. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his basketball shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. He took one look at Alicia's tear-streaked face, and his expression grew serious. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice carrying the protective edge that had developed over the past few months. "Nothing's wrong," Rose said. Alicia got some very good news. "Tell him, sweetheart." Alicia wiped her eyes and explained about the scholarship, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. Marcus listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. "So you could go back to school and become a nurse?" he asked when she finished. "Yes, but I can't leave." "Why not?" Marcus interrupted. "You've been talking about wanting to be a nurse since I was 10 years old. This is your chance." Rose watched the exchange with growing amazement. The angry, defiant boy who'd arrived 8 months ago had been replaced by a young man who could see beyond his own needs. "Marcus, you don't understand," Alicia said. "Grandma Rose needs help with everyone. It's too much for one person." "So we'll help more," Marcus said simply. "I'm 14, not 4. Emma's practically been running the house anyway. The twins listen to her better than they listen to anybody. And I can handle my own laundry and make dinner sometimes." "Sometimes?" Rose asked, raising an eyebrow. "Remember the pancake incident?" Marcus grinned. "I've gotten better. Mrs. Henderson's been teaching me some basics. Besides, you're not exactly dying, Grandma Rose. You're just old." "Thank you for that reassurance," Rose said dryly, but she was smiling. The twins chose that moment to burst through the front door, their faces flushed from playing outside. Tyler's shirt was inside out, and Taylor had what looked like mud in her hair. "Grandma Rose," Tyler announced breathlessly. "We saw a fire truck at the Hendersons' house, but it was just a false alarm because Mr. Henderson burned his toast again." "Again?" Rose asked, shaking her head. "I'm going to have a talk with that man about his breakfast habits." "Why is everyone in the kitchen?" Taylor asked, noticing the serious expressions around her. "Are we in trouble?" "No one's in trouble," Rose assured them. Alicia got some very good news about school. "Are you going back to college?" Emma asked, appearing in the doorway with Lily close behind her. At 12, Emma had developed an uncanny ability to sense when important family discussions were taking place. "I don't know," Alicia admitted. "I want to, but—" "But nothing," Emma interrupted. "You should go. We can handle things here." Rose looked around at the faces surrounding her. Emma's determined expression, Marcus's supportive nod, even the twins' curious attention. When had they all grown up so much? "Can I ask you something?" Rose said to Alicia. "Are you staying because you think I need you, or because you're scared to leave?" Alicia was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe both," she admitted finally. "That's honest," Rose said. "But let me tell you something your mama told me once. She said that love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go." "What if I fail?" Alicia asked quietly. "What if I get there and I can't handle it after being away from school for so long?" "Then you'll figure it out," Rose said. "Just like we figured out how to be a family. Just like we figured out how to survive Marcus's cooking experiments and the twins' art projects on the living room wall." "Hey!" Marcus protested. "That wall thing was all Taylor." "Was not!" Taylor shot back. "Tyler drew the dinosaur." "Both of you drew on the wall," Rose said firmly, "and both of you helped repaint it. That's what families do. We make mistakes, we clean them up, and we keep going." She turned back to Alicia. "You have 2 weeks to decide about this scholarship. I want you to spend that time thinking about what you really want, not what you think you should do." "But what about you?" Alicia asked. "What about everyone else?" Rose looked around at the children who had become her unexpected blessing. "We'll miss you terribly. But we'll also be proud of you. And we'll be here when you come home for visits." "You really think we can manage without me?" Alicia asked, her voice small. "I think we've all learned things about ourselves these past months that we didn't know before," Rose said. "You've learned that you're stronger than you thought." "And so have I." Emma stepped forward. "Alicia, you helped teach me how to take care of everyone. Now I can help teach Marcus and the twins. It's like passing it on." Marcus nodded. "And I can handle more responsibility. I want to. This is my family too." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "You see? We're not the same family we were 8 months ago. We're stronger. We're more connected." "But I'll worry about you," Alicia said. "Good," Rose replied. "That means you love us. But don't let worry make your decisions for you. Let love make them instead." Alicia was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the faces of her family. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Rose said. "But while you're thinking, remember something. Your mama always said that the best way to honor the people who love you is to become the person you're meant to be. I think you're meant to be a nurse, Alicia. I think you're meant to help people heal." "Like you helped us heal?" Emma asked quietly. Rose smiled. "Like we helped each other heal. That's what families do." As the evening settled around them, Rose watched her family disperse to their various activities. Alicia sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scholarship letter. Marcus helped the twins with their homework. Emma read to Lily while baby Grace played with her blocks on the floor. They had become something Rose had never expected. A family born not from traditional circumstances, but from love and necessity, and the simple decision to show up for each other every single day. If Alicia left for college, they would miss her. But they would also celebrate her achievement, because that's what love meant. It meant wanting the best for someone, even when it meant letting them go. Rose picked up Grace, who had crawled over to her chair, and settled the toddler on her lap. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone was trusting them to find their own way. But sometimes, Rose thought as she watched Alicia carefully fold the scholarship letter, that trust was the greatest gift you could give. Jennifer Walsh sat in her car outside the modest house on Maple Street, reviewing the file that had grown thick over the past year. Rose Gibson, 67 years old, caring for 6 children ranging from newborn to 19. What had started as an emergency placement had become something more complex, more permanent. Today's evaluation would determine whether the temporary custody arrangement would become official guardianship. She gathered her clipboard and briefcase, noting the small improvements visible even from the street. The front porch had been repainted, Flower boxes hung under the windows, and a new mailbox stood sturdy by the gate. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and children's bicycles were arranged in an orderly row along the side of the house. Rose answered the door before Jennifer could knock, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. At 67, she looked tired but determined, the kind of exhaustion that came from purpose rather than defeat. "Ms. Walsh," Rose said, extending her hand. "Come in. The children are excited to see you." Jennifer stepped into the living room and was immediately struck by the transformation. The cramped, chaotic space from her first visit had been replaced by something that could only be described as a home. The furniture was still mismatched, but it was clean and well arranged. Children's artwork covered one wall in organized frames, and family photos, new ones, showing Rose with the children, occupied the mantel. "Grandma Rose!" The twins appeared from the kitchen, their faces bright with excitement. Tyler wore a Cleveland Browns t-shirt, while Taylor sported a dress with paint stains on the hem, evidence of some artistic endeavor. "Miss Walsh is here to talk with all of us," Rose explained gently. "Remember what we discussed about being honest and sharing your feelings?" Jennifer settled into the chair Rose indicated, pulling out her evaluation forms. "I'd like to speak with each of you individually, if that's okay. Rose, could we start with you?" For the next hour, Jennifer conducted her interviews. Rose spoke candidly about the challenges and rewards of the past year, her voice steady as she described sleepless nights with Grace, Marcus's arrest and subsequent turnaround, the community support that had made their survival possible. "I won't pretend it's been easy," Rose said, her hands folded in her lap. "There are days when I wonder if I'm too old for this, if these children deserve someone younger, with more energy. But then I see how far we've all come, and I know we belong together." Marcus was next, and Jennifer was struck by the change in him. The angry, defiant teenager from her first visit had been replaced by a young man who spoke thoughtfully about his family. "I was pretty messed up when I first came here," he admitted. "I was mad at everybody. My dad for leaving, my mom for dying, Grandma Rose for being old. But she never gave up on me. She got me into counseling, helped me find basketball, and she always believed I could do better." "Do you feel safe and cared for here?" Jennifer asked. "More than I ever have," Marcus replied without hesitation. "This is my home. These are my people. I can't imagine being anywhere else." Emma was articulate and mature in her responses, describing how she'd learned to balance helping with the family and pursuing her own interests. She spoke proudly of her role as Charlotte in the school play and how the whole family had attended every performance. "Grandma Rose makes sure we all get to be kids," Emma said. "She helps with homework, comes to school events, and she never makes us feel like we're a burden. She's not just taking care of us, she's raising us." The twins were effusive in their praise, their 8-year-old perspectives refreshingly simple. "Grandma Rose makes the best pancakes," Tyler announced. "And she lets us help in the garden." "She reads us stories and tucks us in every night," Taylor added. "She says we're her sunshine." Lily, now 6 and more articulate than she'd been a year ago, spoke with the wisdom of a child who'd experienced loss and found security again. "I was scared when Mama went to heaven," she said quietly. "But Grandma Rose promised she would take care of me forever, and she keeps her promises. She's like a mama and a grandma, all mixed together." Grace, now a toddler, couldn't participate in the interview, but Jennifer observed her interactions with Rose throughout the visit. The child clearly adored her grandmother, reaching for her with chubby arms and babbling contentedly in her lap. The surprise came when Jennifer asked to speak with Alicia, who had returned from college for the evaluation. "I was terrified when Grandma Rose first took us all in," Alicia admitted. "I thought it would be too much for her, that we'd overwhelm her. But she's proven me wrong every day. She's not just surviving this. She's thriving." "And how do you feel about being away at college?" Jennifer asked. "Guilty sometimes," Alicia said honestly, "but also grateful. Grandma Rose taught me that loving someone means wanting the best for them, even when it's hard." She pushed me to pursue my dreams. And now I'm studying to be a nurse. I want to help people the way she's helped us." Jennifer made notes, impressed by the consistency of the children's responses. There was no rehearsed quality to their answers, no sense that they were saying what they thought she wanted to hear. "Rose," Jennifer said when the interviews were complete, "I need to ask you about your health. Dr. Williams has expressed some concerns about the physical demands of caring for 6 children. Rose nodded. "I won't lie to you. There are days when my arthritis makes it hard to keep up with Grace. My blood pressure is higher than it should be, and I get tired more easily than I used to. But I'm managing my health carefully, and I have a strong support system. Tell me about that support system." Rose's face brightened. "Mrs. Henderson helps with transportation and babysitting. Pastor Johnson and the church provide meals when I'm overwhelmed. The school counselors keep me informed about the children's emotional needs. Dr. Williams monitors my health closely. And the children themselves have learned to help each other." Jennifer reviewed her notes, thinking about the family she'd first encountered a year ago. The overwhelmed grandmother, the angry teenager, the traumatized children. They'd all grown, all adapted, all found their place in this unusual family structure. "Rose, I have to ask, do you ever regret taking on this responsibility?" Rose was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving to the wall of family photos. "I regret that my daughter isn't here to see how amazing her children are. I regret that they've had to experience such loss at young ages. But regret taking them in? Never. They've given me purpose I didn't know I needed." "And what do you see for the future?" "I see Marcus graduating high school and maybe going to college. I see Emma continuing to excel in school and theater. I see the twins growing up confident and happy. I see Lily overcoming her early trauma and becoming the caring little girl she was always meant to be. And I see Grace growing up surrounded by love and family." Rose paused. "I see myself being there for all of it, for as long as I'm able." Jennifer closed her notebook and looked around the room once more. The afternoon sun streamed through clean windows, illuminating a space that radiated warmth and stability. Children's laughter echoed from the backyard, where Marcus was pushing Grace on a swing while the twins played nearby. "Rose," Jennifer said finally, "when I first met you, I had serious doubts about this arrangement. The ages of the children, your age, the financial challenges, it seemed overwhelming." Rose tensed slightly, preparing herself for whatever came next. "But what I've witnessed over the past year has changed my perspective completely. You've not just cared for these children, you've created a family. They're thriving academically, emotionally, and socially. They feel secure, loved, and valued. And you've built a community of support that ensures their needs are met." Rose held her breath. "I'm recommending permanent guardianship," Jennifer continued, "with the understanding that you'll continue to work with Dr. Williams on health management and maintain your support systems." Rose's composure finally cracked, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing what we've become." Jennifer packed her materials but lingered at the door. "Rose, can I ask you something? What would you tell other grandparents who might find themselves in similar situations?" Rose wiped her tears and smiled. "I'd tell them that love doesn't have an expiration date, that it's never too late to start a new chapter, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest challenges." As Jennifer walked to her car, she could hear the family gathering for dinner, voices calling out updates about school and plans for the weekend. It was the sound of a family, not perfect, not traditional, but real and resilient, and bound by something stronger than blood. She thought about her report, about the official language she would use to describe what she'd witnessed. But no bureaucratic phrases could capture the true miracle of what Rose Gibson had accomplished. She'd taken 6 grieving children and created a home. She'd taken her own grief and transformed it into purpose. Sometimes, Jennifer reflected as she drove away, the most important evaluations couldn't be measured by standard criteria. Sometimes you had to look at the whole picture: the laughter, the security, the love that filled every corner of a modest house on Maple Street. Rose Gibson had passed every test that mattered. The weight of stars Rose Gibson sat in her backyard on a clear October night, exactly 1 year after the phone call that changed everything. Grace, now a sturdy toddler with Sarah's dark eyes and stubborn chin, dozed peacefully in her arms. At 18 months old, Grace had finally learned to sleep through the night, giving Rose these precious moments of stillness she'd almost forgotten existed. The custody papers lay folded in her sweater pocket, signed and sealed 3 hours ago. Jennifer Walsh had delivered them personally, her expression soft with something that looked like pride. "You've done something remarkable here, Rose," she'd said, watching Marcus help Tyler with his homework at the kitchen table while Emma braided Lily's hair. "These children aren't just surviving, they're thriving." Rose adjusted Grace's blanket and looked up at the stars scattered across the Cleveland sky. Light pollution dimmed their brilliance, but she could still make out the constellations her father had taught her 60 years ago. Orion stood guard in the east, his belt a straight line of ancient light. She'd always found comfort in stars. Their steadfast presence, their reminder that some things endured beyond human struggle. "Grandma Rose?" Emma's voice drifted from the back door. At 13 now, she'd grown 3 inches and developed an uncanny ability to sense when Rose needed company. "Can't sleep? Just thinking, sweetheart, come sit with me." Emma padded across the grass in her fuzzy slippers, settling beside Rose on the old porch swing. The chains creaked softly under their combined weight. "About Mama?" Rose nodded, still looking up at the stars. "About all of it. This whole year." They sat in comfortable silence, 3 generations of Gibson women under the infinite sky. Grace's breathing remained steady and deep, her small fist curled around Rose's finger. Emma leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, solid and warm and smelling faintly of the lavender soap Rose had taught her to make. "I miss her," Emma whispered. "I know, baby girl, I miss her too. But I'm glad we have you." Rose's throat tightened. A year ago, she'd been a woman whose story was winding down, whose chapters were mostly written. She'd raised her 3 children, buried her husband, survived the small tragedies and large disappointments that accumulate over nearly 7 decades of living. Retirement had beckoned like a gentle harbor after decades of storm. Then came the phone call that shattered her quiet world. But sitting here now, with Grace's warm weight in her arms and Emma's trust pressed against her side, Rose understood something she hadn't grasped in those first desperate months. This wasn't the end of her story. It was perhaps the most important chapter she'd ever written. The back door opened again, and Marcus emerged carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. At 15, he'd grown tall and lean. His anger transformed into something steadier: responsibility, purpose, a fierce protectiveness of his younger siblings that reminded Rose achingly of Sarah. He'd been accepted to Cleveland State's early admission program, planning to study social work. "Somebody's got to understand the system," he'd told her last month, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Couldn't sleep either?" Rose asked, accepting the warm mug gratefully. "Alicia called. She made Dean's List again." Pride colored his voice. His older sister had returned to college 9 months ago, and though Rose missed her desperately, she'd never regretted encouraging that choice. Love sometimes meant letting go, even when holding on felt safer. "And Tyler threw up," Marcus added with a grimace. "I cleaned it up, but Emma might want to check on him." Emma was already rising, her 13-year-old instincts honed by a year of unexpected responsibility. "Probably too much cake from the celebration dinner," she said, padding back toward the house. Marcus settled where Emma had been, his presence both comforting and surreal. A year ago he'd been her greatest challenge, an angry boy who'd seen her as nothing more than an obstacle to his freedom. Now he was her right hand, her co-conspirator in the daily miracle of keeping their family together. "You know what I realized today?" Marcus said, sipping his chocolate. "When Mrs. Walsh handed you those papers, it wasn't really about proving you could take care of us. You'd already done that. It was about making it official, making you legally what you've always been." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "What's that?" "Our real mom, the one who chose us, who fought for us, who stayed when everyone else left. Grace stirred in Rose's arms, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. What did 18-month-old children dream about? Rose wondered. Did Grace dream of the mother she'd never known, or of the grandmother who'd become her world? I used to think, Rose said slowly, that my purpose was finished. That I'd done my job raising my children, and now I got to rest. Watch from the sidelines while you all grew up and made your own lives. And now? Rose looked up at the stars again, Orion still standing guard, still holding his position in the vast darkness. Now I understand that purpose isn't something you finish. It's something you carry, and sometimes it gets heavier, not lighter, as you get older. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you named this story The Weight of Stars? Because stars carry their purpose until they burn out. Rose smiled, remembering the night she'd started writing in the journal Dr. Williams had suggested. She'd called it The Weight of Stars, without fully understanding why, but Marcus had always been perceptive beyond his years. Stars don't just burn out, she said. The biggest ones become something new when they die. They collapse under their own weight and become the foundation for new stars to be born. Grace's eyes fluttered open, dark and curious and completely trusting. She looked up at Rose and smiled, the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who'd never known a world without this particular grandmother's love. "Baba," Grace babbled, reaching for Rose's face with chubby fingers. "That's right, sweetheart. Grandma's here." But as Rose kissed Grace's forehead and felt the weight of 6 children's futures pressing against her heart, she knew she was more than just Grandma now. She was their anchor, their constant, their proof that love could expand beyond what seemed possible. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and patient and eternal. And Rose Gibson, at 68, finally understood that her greatest purpose had come not at the beginning of her story, but when she thought her chapter was ending. The weight of stars wasn't a burden. It was a gift. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,